Vinnie Iyer from the Sporting News joining us on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Vinnie, how you doing on this Wednesday?
Good. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Appreciate you coming on. So first thing I want to ask you about is about the news that came out yesterday with Todd Gurley. This is the guy who's going to get $45 million guaranteed. And today the news comes out that Aaron Donald is not present when the team players had to report at the Rams facility. So last week you had Brandon Cooks got his contract. Then Todd Gurley gets his contract this week. We're still waiting on Aaron Donald. What do you think the holdup is in those negotiations?
Well, I think you're dealing with a player where, unlike Brandon Cooks and Todd Gurley, that it doesn't take much to please that player, because when they paid Brandon Cooks or they paid Todd Gurley well over the market value for what a player is worth, and also earlier than expected for them to break the bank. With Aaron Donald, you're looking at more of a J.J. Watt realm, highest paid defensive player type of thing, where it's a whole different level of contract that you're looking at in relation to the market. So in effect, they kind of went overboard to go and get Gurley and Cooks, and some would say maybe not a financially responsible decision at this point when they have to lock up more of the cornerstone of their defense in Donald, where wide receiver running back seems to be a little bit not as a supply-demand type of position, where a player like Donald, you just don't have very many like those in the league that set up everything on your defense. So there's understanding that he's going to be upset when he sees these other guys get money, especially a guy like Cooks who just comes in there and hasn't really proved himself within the team's framework. So it's got to be frustrating. There were going to be some repercussions of that deal, and you're seeing them right away.
We know the Eagles found a way to get their deal done with Fletcher Cox, who himself is one of the best D linemen in the game today. There was no holdout. So is this an issue that maybe a team like the Eagles were either farther along with Cox than the Rams are with Donald, or is this an issue where maybe the agent for Donald is maybe asking for more than he should be?
Well, I think when you give luxury contracts to two guys that when you look at the market versus their position that were well over, then you look at Donald, who's far exceeding his value at his position, and I think he's a bit of a transcendent player. You look at him as a defensive lineman, but we know he's a lot more than that, where he sets the tone for an entire defense. It changes the whole outlook of the defense when he's in there. You don't bring in Ndamukong Suh and take that chance if you don't have Donald in there dominating on one side and hoping that Sue can do something there. So everything they want to do, he sets the tone for the pass rush. They don't really have a lot of established edge pass rushers there. So how much he means to that defense, I think it just got a little higher with how much they were willing to pay offense.
Speaking of guys who are asking for a new contract, you got Julio Jones down in Atlanta. Very unique situation. He's still got 3 years left on that deal he signed a couple of years ago. And it's a bizarre situation because usually when guys are holding out, it's because they're either vastly underpaid like Aaron Donald is, or they're going into one of the final years of their contract. But Julio's got 3 years left on that deal. So how can both sides overcome this impasse?
Yeah, it's very difficult. I don't think he has much leverage here, unfortunately, and that's just the case. Unless you're betting on yourself year after year, the Kirk Cousins model, and hoping that you stay healthy and you keep resetting the market by yourself, you're not going to get what you want and try to get your value, especially if you sign those long-term deals with what's guaranteed. Teams just have no reason to budge there, because you look at Julio Jones, yeah, I think he can, another guy who can point to this Cooks deal and look at it and say, wait a second, I've done a lot more than this player in my career. I see what Antonio Brown's making in relation to myself, and he knows how valuable he is to the offense. So the timing seems a little bit off, just in terms of he doesn't have much to stand on there. Maybe it was 1 year later, then maybe the Falcons might be more inclined if you put in one more big season there for them. So there's just a lot of a frustration there that the timing wasn't exactly good here for Julio Jones to get paid what he wants to match the market.
Vinny, I want to switch gears. The tone of the day for our show today has been quarterbacks, and I want to talk about Carson Wentz And obviously, me personally, I didn't expect him to be a part. Now, it's not, and nothing's official yet, but I don't expect him to be a part of training camp or the preseason just with the nature of that injury. But I put it out there that, it's not out of the realm that the Eagles should consider putting him on the real PUP list and allowing him to get fully healthy, especially how strong what Nick Foles looked last season.
Yeah, there's a lot of that to be considered here because they need to see him do a lot of things legitimately well. And they also have to be careful, even if he looks somewhat okay, not to rush him out there because mobility is such a big part of his game. You want him to maybe rein back the way he plays a little bit so he's not trying to pull Houdini acts and go into the pile and have more chances to get injured. But that said, you want to keep that aspect of his game alive and around because you know what that means to his abilities on the field. So you have to factor all that in. You have to factor in Foles. That's why you held firm and not trade Foles, even though he's going into a contract year here. So I think the Eagles did this on purpose to say, okay, we have to keep this insurance policy. We know it's the ultimate one. We won a Super Bowl with it. So, and the thing that Foles has right now, you can buy them a lot of time. And if there's any doubt at all about Carson Wentz, they should totally take advantage of that and use that so he gets a little extra time.
And then I want to flip it to the other situation with another young quarterback in Deshaun Watson. And he's actually starting camp with the Texans. And by all indications, he's going to be ready for week 1. It's a different situation over there because they don't have the level of backup that the Eagles do. But this is the second torn ACL for Deshaun Watson. Will this change the player that he was last season?
Well, I think the Texans have said they don't want to change this type of player, and that's going to be the tough thing is how can they get him to maybe take that next level without maybe going as much with the running. But they have to keep the running aspect. It does make him special. I mean, you look at Russell Wilson, they really haven't curbed him as much as people would think you would with all the hits, but you see the kind of a player in the seasons he's having by playing to his natural ability. So, yeah, as much as you want to say that you don't want Watson to run into trouble, you don't want to take that away from him because it can just change games, as we saw last year when he's out there. So right now the Texans don't plan on peeling back on that, and they shouldn't. I think they should find ways for him to do it, be smarter and pick his spots about it. But I don't think that's going to have them play with fear with Deshaun Watson.
Vinnie Iyer of the Sporting News joining us here on 97.3 ESPN on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Here on the Sports Bash, Josh Hennig and Dashawn Hendricks hanging out with you. Vinny, speaking of a guy who's coming off of an injury and looking for a new contract, that's Odell Beckham Jr. And I've been saying that to me, the fact that he is at camp, the fact that he's been so involved in the voluntary and the involuntary offseason for the Giants, I think could add up to him having a great season and putting him in a prime position to getting the contract that he wants. This is a guy who's been saying, I want to be paid this big money. And I think he's doing a great job of putting himself in position to get that kind of money.
Yeah, you have to look at Odell Beckham and this offense, and you see what it did for Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen, and you look at Odell Beckham and Sterling Shepard. There's a lot of parallels there with the production there, with what they can do with Pat Shurmur in there. And when you look at Mike Shula and what he brings, you know that some receivers have had some big seasons in that offense as well. So everything is set up for Odell Beckham to be successful. I think the key thing, bottom line, is he came into this league with a hamstring issue. Last year, the latest thing was a ankle issue. So he's got to just be healthy, play the all 16. And we know when he plays all 16 how dominant he can be. And this offense, when you look at it with Sterling Shepard, Evan Ingram, it's going to be pretty productive with Saquon Barkley also supporting the passing game.
And speaking of Barkley, that offense all being built around Eli Manning. Do you think Eli still has another solid, good season left in him? Because they improved the offensive line. You mentioned the drafting of Barkley. Evan Ingram entering his second season. At least looks like, bringing in a Shurmur, bringing in a Mike Shula, this is a Giants team that could definitely potentially make a run at a wild card spot.
Yeah, it's a team that there should be some excitement to think that it can be more like the form of 2 years ago. It's going to be very difficult because the NFC is very difficult. Their schedule in particular is difficult. You know how good the Eagles are. You know how good the Cowboys can be. So it'll be all difficult to come together. You are breaking in new coach, a couple new schemes, all these things being thrown at this team at once. But Eli Manning just has to be steady. I mean, to me, he wasn't that great 2 years ago, but they had such a dominant defense where they got there. So I think this particular year, if they're going to get back to the playoffs, he's going to have to be a lot better and show some of the career best type of form here if they're going to get to the playoffs.
Sticking with veteran quarterbacks with something to prove, John Harbaugh was asked about, Joe Flacco and Lamar Jackson, and basically said Joe is our starter, but Lamar is going to get some snaps. To me, that sounds like that they're preparing, to play Lamar if they need to. What does that say to you?
Yeah, I mean, it just says that they're excited about this kid. They want to get him in there as much as possible. It's going to be hard, this wrinkle of treating him like a gimmick quarterback. We know that can only work with limited success here. I think in a way he's saying Joe Flacco, if he slips up off to a slow start, they're not going to hesitate to go with Lamar Jackson if they feel comfortable with him and camp and see what they like in the preseason. So I think it's a high alert for Joe Flacco. When you look at these other situations with the rookie quarterbacks, Baker Mayfield seems like a long way from starting. Josh Allen, Sam Darnold, and Josh Rosen, they're really battling for spots here. But the thing that might develop quickly, and we saw this with Deshaun Watson last year, that Lamar Jackson, more natural physical athletic ability, comes in there and has some success right away. And I could see Flacco faltering early and then making that change.
Follow him on Twitter at Vinnie Iyer on Twitter. He's been our guest on the Boardwalk on the Hotline. Check out his work in the sporting news, covers the NFL, also fantasy sports as well. Vinnie, appreciate your time on a Wednesday, and it's good to have football back, man.
Yeah, it certainly is, and thanks again for having me.